Wait, you pay your parents' rent! Grandpa Elias stopped chewing his fork hovering over his plate. I froze the cranberry sauce, suddenly tasting like ash in my mouth. Before I could even formulate an answer, my father waved his hand dismissively. Your sister has 2 kids, Elias. She needs the help more. The entire dining room went dead silent. Nobody expected what I was about to say next. My name is Kendra. I am 34 years old, and for my entire life, I have been the designated scapegoat of my family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you have carried weight for people who do not appreciate you. Growing up in an affluent African-American suburb of Atlanta, appearances meant absolutely everything to my parents, Vivian and Marcus. We lived in a sprawling estate with a manicured lawn and neighbors who judged you by the badge on your luxury vehicle. I was the eldest, the workaholic who earned a degree in forensic accounting, working grueling hours to build a career. Yet in my parents' highly critical eyes, I was a massive failure simply because I was unmarried and choosing to live in their finished basement. My younger sister Jada was the undeniable golden child of the household. At 31, she was a lifestyle influencer who spent her days recording herself unboxing designer bags she could not afford. Her crowning achievement, according to my deeply obsessed mother, was marrying Trent. Trent was 33, a white tech guy who spoke entirely in corporate buzzwords and possessed Silicon Valley entitlement. He constantly bragged about his investments and crypto portfolios, masking the dark reality that he was financially bleeding my family dry. I endured their daily condescension because I had a plan, a secret that kept me grounded every time they tried to humiliate me. To truly comprehend the absolute absurdity of my family's dynamic, you have to look back at the psychological warfare that defined my childhood. The toxicity didn't start with Trent. It was carefully cultivated by my mother over decades. Vivian was a woman whose entire self-worth was dictated by Eurocentric beauty standards and country club hierarchy. From the moment I was old enough to understand words, she made it painfully clear that I was a massive disappointment to her aesthetic vision. I had inherited my grandfather Elias's deep, rich, dark skin and his broad, strong features. Jada, however, was born with lighter skin, looser curls, and the delicate, fragile features my mother practically worshipped. I remember my high school graduation day vividly. I had just been named valedictorian, securing a full-ride academic scholarship to a prestigious university. I had spent 4 years studying until my eyes bled, desperate to earn just a fraction of my parents' pride. After the ceremony, I stood in the humid Atlanta heat, holding my heavy, golden trophy. Vivian barely looked at it. She was too busy taking dozens of photographs of 16-year-old Jada, who was wearing a new, incredibly expensive designer dress. Kendra, put that heavy thing down and fix your posture, Vivian had snapped at me that afternoon, not even bothering to look through the camera lens at me. And please try to do something with your hair before my friends come over for the celebration dinner. You always look so painfully severe. Why can't you be soft and graceful like your sister? That was the day I finally stopped crying over my mother's rejection. That was the exact moment my heart turned to absolute ice regarding my biological parents. I realized that no amount of academic brilliance, no amount of hard work, and no amount of financial success would ever make me beautiful in her incredibly toxic colorist eyes. I packed my bags for college a week later and fully threw myself into the cold, predictable, and highly rewarding world of forensic accounting. Numbers did not care about the shade of my skin. Numbers did not care if I was soft or graceful. Numbers only cared about the absolute truth. While I was building my unshakable empire in the shadows, my parents were busy spoiling their golden child into absolute financial ruin. They paid for Jada to drop out of 3 different private universities. They funded her luxurious apartment in Midtown. They bought her the latest imported cars, all while quietly taking out massive high-interest personal loans to maintain their own fake high society facade. And then, like a vulture circling a dying animal, Trent Sterling entered the picture. Jada met Trent at an exclusive rooftop mixer in Buckhead exactly 3 years ago. When she brought him home for Sunday dinner for the very first time, I instantly recognized him for exactly what he was. He walked through our grand front doors, wearing a custom linen suit, aggressively shaking my father's hand, while using hollow, meaningless Silicon Valley buzzwords like synergy, blockchain integration, and disruptive market capture. My parents were completely hopelessly mesmerized. Trent was white. He projected an aura of immense generational wealth, and he completely validated their desperate need to feel elite. I, however, simply watched him. I noticed that his expensive Rolex was actually a highly convincing, high-quality replica. I noticed that his custom leather shoes were severely scuffed at the heels, a glaring sign of someone who couldn't afford a cobbler. And most importantly, I noticed the predatory way his pale eyes scanned our expensive living room, rapidly calculating the total net worth of the artwork, the crystal vases, and the imported rugs. Within exactly 2 months of dating Jada, Trent had completely manipulated my father. Marcus, desperate to be seen as a savvy tech investor, began quietly funneling money from his retirement accounts directly into Trent's completely invisible startups. Trent would print out fake, highly complex graphs showing exponential growth, and Marcus would eagerly write him another massive check. Whenever I tried to gently warn my father using my professional expertise as a certified forensic auditor to point out the glaring red flags in Trent's business models, I was immediately and viciously shut down. "You just don't understand the aggressive nature of venture capital, Kendra." Marcus had scoffed at me in his home office one evening, waving a dismissive hand in my direction. "You are just a glorified bookkeeper. Trent is a true visionary. He is playing chess while you are playing checkers. You are just bitter because Jada secured a high-value man while you are still single." It was a devastating insult, but it completely solidified my resolve. If they wanted to blindly follow a white-collar criminal right off a financial cliff just because he looked the part, I was not going to stand at the bottom and catch them. Instead, I bought the cliff. When the bank finally came to collect on my parents' catastrophic debts 2 years ago, I didn't warn them. I let them experience the sheer terror of receiving the foreclosure notices. And when they were exactly 72 hours away from being physically thrown onto the street by the county sheriff, I quietly purchased their debt through my anonymous holding company. I moved into their finished basement under the guise of saving money. They demanded $3,000 a month in rent, acting as if they were doing me a massive charitable favor, completely unaware that their spinster daughter was actually their new landlord collecting the mortgage. I sat down there in the dark, quietly biding my time, meticulously building my financial dossier, and waiting for the perfect moment to completely dismantle their fake empire. And that perfect moment finally arrived on a chilly Thursday evening in November. The clash began right over the roasted turkey. The long dining room table was set immaculately, with my mother's finest china and sparkling crystal glasses presenting a perfect, flawless picture of generational wealth. Trent swirled his expensive red wine, took a pretentious sip, and looked directly at me with a deeply patronizing smirk on his face. "You know, Kendra, if you understood basic wealth building, you would not be stuck living in your parents' basement at your age. Real estate is all about strategic leverage. You are just throwing your earned money away." Jada giggled softly, deliberately, adjusting the shiny new diamond tennis bracelet Trent had allegedly bought her for their recent anniversary. "Leave her alone, babe," Jada cooed sweetly, though her dark eyes danced with obvious malice. "Not everyone has the brave mindset for entrepreneurship. Someone has to sit in a cubicle and crunch the boring numbers all day long." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my ice water, pressing my lips together to keep my rising temper completely in check. My mother Vivian chimed in immediately, elegantly smoothing the front of her expensive silk blouse. "Trent is just trying to give you some very sound financial advice, Kendra. It is honestly embarrassing that you are still so dependent on us. You should be incredibly grateful we let you stay down there." That was the exact moment when my grandfather Elias dropped his heavy silver fork. A veteran who built a logistics empire entirely from scratch, Elias absolutely hated pretension and fake displays of wealth. He looked directly at me from across the long table, his sharp, observant eyes narrowing in sudden confusion. I thought you were living down there temporarily to save up capital to start your own accounting firm. My father Marcus cleared his throat very nervously, his forehead suddenly glistening with a thin layer of nervous sweat under the dining room chandelier. It is just a very small basic contribution, Dad. You know, just to help cover the rising utilities and weekly groceries. Your sister has 2 young kids. She needs the financial help a lot more right now, and Kendra has no real pressing responsibilities. Trent scoffed loudly, leaning back in his velvet dining chair with a look of absolute unearned superiority. Exactly, Marcus. It is basically a fully subsidized existence. If she were actually ambitious and thinking forward, she would be out building a diverse property portfolio, not draining her family valuable resources. The sheer audacity of the lie was completely suffocating. For 2 long, difficult years, I had quietly handed over exactly $3,000 on the first day of every single month without fail. I had sacrificed my own comfort, endured their endless petty insults, and let them parade around Atlanta high society as if they were untouchable royalty, all while they treated me like an unwanted, burdensome tenant in my own life. I looked at Jada's sparkling diamond bracelet, then at Trent's incredibly arrogant face, and finally at my parents, who were silently, desperately begging me with their wide eyes to play along and protect their precious, fragile public image. I carefully placed my white linen napkin on the polished wooden table, folding the fabric with very deliberate, slow precision. The large room became so incredibly quiet, you could easily hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I am not paying rent, I said, my voice incredibly steady and completely devoid of any emotion as I stared directly at Trent. And I am certainly not draining anyone resources right now. Trent rolled his eyes and let out a harsh, patronizing laugh that echoed against the expensive walls of the dining room. Oh, please. What do you call handing over $3,000 a month for a basement room? I looked him dead in the eyes and smiled. I just call it the mortgage, you arrogant little thief, I said. My mother slammed both her hands onto the dining table. The impact rattled the fine china and caused her glass of expensive wine to dangerously sway back and forth quickly. How dare you speak to your family with utter disrespect? Vivian shrieked loudly, her angry voice echoing violently against the bright crystal chandeliers hanging beautifully above the long dining table. You are paying rent. We are generously allowing you to rent the finished basement. You should show some absolute gratitude. I did not flinch at her loud and abusive tone. I slowly reached into my large leather tote bag, resting securely beside my wooden chair, and pulled out a very thick stack of official legal documents, securely bound together inside a dark blue folder. I tossed it right onto the exact center of the table directly next to the turkey. I am not renting anything, I stated firmly, making absolutely sure my voice remained perfectly calm and incredibly measured throughout. 2 years ago, you and Dad secretly took out a massive second mortgage on this exact house. You completely drained your remaining equity to fund Trent and his absolutely disastrous cryptocurrency startup company. When that venture predictably collapsed entirely, you went into severe default. The bank initiated active foreclosure proceedings exactly 12 months ago. The face of my father immediately turned the color of pale ash. He looked frantically toward the closed kitchen doors, as if terrified the wealthy neighbors could somehow hear us arguing through the thick brick walls. Kendra, keep your voice down right now, Marcus hissed quietly, his rising panic completely overriding his usual strict authoritative tone. We had everything completely under control. It was just a temporary liquidity issue. A temporary liquidity issue? I challenged quickly, leaning forward across the table. You were 72 hours away from being physically locked out by the county sheriff. To protect this family from total public humiliation, I purchased the specific debt. I bought this entire property straight from the bank using an anonymous limited liability company. That $3,000 you constantly demand from me every single month is not rent. It is the mortgage payment you owe me. I am your landlord. Absolute chaos immediately erupted around the dining room table. Vivian shrieked again, aggressively denying the severe reality of their financial ruin. She desperately prioritized her fake socialite image over the cold, hard truth, insisting loudly that they were still elite members of society and that I was just a bitter, jealous woman attempting to steal their grand legacy. Marcus buried his sweating face heavily in his shaking hands, completely unable to dispute the legal documents staring him right in the face. Jada began to cry, loudly terrified that her luxury lifestyle was suddenly in jeopardy. Then Trent decided to intervene directly. He stood up slowly, adjusting the stiff cuffs of his tailored designer shirt, using his white male privilege to attempt to fully intimidate me. He walked around the large dining table, stepping directly into my personal space, trying to tower over me with a look of pure, unadulterated arrogance and utter disdain. "You think you are so remarkably smart playing these little accounting games?" Trent scoffed, laughing off the thick legal document without even bothering to read a single page of it. "You really think some cheap poverty-level holding company makes you a real player in the business world? You are just a glorified calculator, Kendra. You have absolutely no idea how real wealth is actually generated or sustained." He aggressively grabbed his crumpled linen napkin from his chair and threw it directly at my chest. It fluttered down into my lap as he sneered at me with absolute contempt. "You want to play landlord fine?" Trent declared boldly, puffing out his chest and looking around the room to ensure Jada and my parents were eagerly watching his triumphant performance. "My brand new artificial intelligence startup just secured a massive $10 million term sheet from a top-tier venture capital firm. We close the deal next week. When that cash hits my corporate account, I am going to buy this house out from under your pathetic little company. I will pay double whatever you paid the bank, and then I am going to personally evict you. You will be out on the street where you truly belong, and this family will never have to look at your miserable face again." Jada immediately stopped crying. A look of immense relief and triumphant pride washed over her face. "Tell her, babe," Jada cheered, clapping her hands together rapidly. "Show her what a real businessman looks like. She is just jealous because she will never achieve anything remotely close to what you already have." My mother also rallied behind him, her confidence instantly restored by Trent and his loud, boasting promises of impending millions. "You hear that, Kendra?" Vivian taunted loudly, pointing a shaking manicured finger at me. "Trent is going to save this family just like he always does. He is a visionary. You are nothing but a petty, vindictive accountant who just wants to drag us all down into your miserable, lonely life." I sat there perfectly still, letting their bitter insults wash over me. As a forensic accountant, my entire career was built on dismantling lies, tracing hidden funds, and uncovering corporate fraud. People like Trent were not visionaries. They were my daily prey. I looked at the crumpled napkin in my lap, then slowly raised my eyes to meet Trent. His arrogant smile was plastered firmly across his face, completely certain of his ultimate victory over me. I smiled back at him, a genuine, terrifying smile that caused his confident posture to slightly falter for just a fraction of a second. $10 million, I repeated slowly. That is an impressive valuation. You must have revolutionary technology to secure institutional backing quickly. So Trent, since you are going to evict me, exactly which venture capital firm backed your artificial intelligence startup? Trent laughed, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive designer shirt. "Apex Capital Partners. You have probably never heard of them while sitting down in your depressing basement, but they are the biggest, most aggressive institutional investors in the entire southeast region of the country. We shook hands on the term sheet yesterday morning. $10 million. My company Neural Nexus is going to completely revolutionize machine learning algorithms for supply chain logistics." I slowly reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my tablet. The metal felt familiar against my fingertips. I typed in my passcode, the screen illuminating my face in the dim room. "Neural Nexus," I said aloud, tapping the glass screen rapidly. "Let us take a quick look at this brilliant revolutionary company." Jada rolled her dark eyes, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "Stop being so incredibly jealous, Kendra. You are just embarrassing yourself now. Trent is a certified genius." I ignored my sister entirely. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard, accessing the public corporate registry's federal business databases and the specialized financial tracking software I used every single day at my firm. I spent over 70 intense hours a week relentlessly hunting down phantom assets and exposing complex corporate shell games. Unraveling a sloppy, egomaniacal tech brother took me far less than 3 brief minutes. Truly fascinating, I murmured, staring intently at the glowing screen. According to the Delaware Division of Corporations, Neural Nexus was incorporated exactly 4 months ago. Yet you are claiming a $10 million valuation based on a revolutionary algorithm. That is incredibly impressive for a company that currently has absolutely zero registered patents, zero intellectual property filings, and zero proprietary code on record. Trent swallowed hard, his throat bobbing very sharply against his tight collar. The confident, arrogant sneer on his face slipped just a tiny fraction. You have no idea what you are talking about. Software development moves fast. We operate in stealth mode to protect our highly valuable trade secrets from corporate espionage. Stealth mode, I repeated, letting a short, cold laugh escape my lips. Is that what you call having zero employees? Because according to your own mandatory tax filings, you do not have a single software engineer on your payroll. You do not even have a fractional chief technology officer. In fact, the only two people drawing any kind of salary from Neural Nexus are you and Jada. And my father, Marcus, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting back and forth between Trent and my tablet. Kendra, that is enough. Trent explained that he outsourced the initial coding to a highly specialized overseas team to keep the overhead costs perfectly optimized. He lied to you, Dad, I stated firmly, looking up from the screen to meet my father's terrified gaze. I am looking directly at the corporate bank statements you attached to your public disclosure forms. There are no outgoing international wire transfers to any overseas developers. However, there are massive, incredibly frequent outgoing payments to luxury car dealerships, high-end designer boutiques, and five-star resorts in Miami. You are not building an artificial intelligence company, Trent. You are operating a very basic, extremely sloppy piggy bank to fund your fake influencer lifestyle. Trent aggressively slammed his heavy hands down onto the polished wooden table, making all of the tall crystal water glasses rattle violently and dangerously. This is highly classified corporate information. You are illegally hacking into my secure private files. I am reading your publicly filed documentation, you absolute fraud. I shot back, my voice rising with undeniable authority. You submitted these exact same fabricated documents to the state when you applied for your business license. You claim projected annual revenues of $2.5 million by the fourth quarter, yet your actual current revenue is exactly zero. You have no clients, you have no product, you have no code. You are literally selling a fancy PowerPoint presentation heavily decorated with meaningless industry buzzwords. My mother, Vivian, suddenly leaped up from her chair, her face contorted with absolute rage. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her voice reaching a shrill, piercing pitch that hurt my ears. Stop it right this instant, Kendra. Stop viciously attacking your successful brother-in-law. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand to see anyone else in this family achieve greatness. Trent is bringing immense wealth and incredible prestige into our home, and you are trying to ruin everything with your petty, jealous little accounting tricks. He is not bringing wealth, Mom, I said, my voice completely steady despite her screaming. He is actively committing federal wire fraud. If he actually submitted these completely fabricated financial statements to a legitimate venture capital firm across state lines, he has crossed the threshold into serious criminal territory. He secured $10 million from Apex Capital Partners, Vivian screamed, slamming her manicured hands against her hips. That proves he is a legitimate businessman. They are the smartest investors in the entire state of Georgia, and they completely believe in him. You are just a pathetic hater. Trent puffed out his chest again, desperately trying to regain his shattered composure. Exactly, Vivian. Thank you. Apex Capital Partners did a full comprehensive review of my business model. They absolutely loved my vision. They are writing the check next week, and there is absolutely nothing your pathetic, miserable jealousy can do to stop my success. I slowly closed the premium black leather cover of my tablet, intentionally letting it fall against the wooden table with a very soft, highly definitive thud. I looked at Trent, then at Jada, and finally at my screaming mother. The corners of my mouth curled upward into a slow, devastating smile. "That is incredibly fascinating, Trent," I said, keeping my tone dangerously quiet and perfectly clear. "Because I happen to know the managing partner of Apex Capital Partners extremely well. In fact, they are my biggest corporate clients." Trent stared at me, the blood draining from his face so quickly he looked physically ill. The smug confidence that had radiated from him all evening vanished, replaced by the frantic, wide-eyed look of a cornered animal. He opened his mouth to speak, closed it, and then swallowed hard. His white privilege and corporate bravado were suddenly useless against the cold, hard reality of my professional connections. He forced a strained, unnatural laugh, looking around the dining room to see if Jada or my parents were buying his performance. "You are completely bluffing," Trent stammered, his voice lacking its previous booming authority. "There is absolutely no way a top-tier venture capital firm like Apex Capital Partners is doing business with a basement-dwelling accountant. You are just making up names to save face in front of your family. If you know the managing partner so well, prove it. Call them right now, I dare you. Put your money where your mouth is, Kendra." I did not hesitate for a single second. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my smartphone, unlocking the screen with a quick fluid motion. I tapped on my contact list, searching for the name of the senior managing partner at Apex Capital Partners. His name was Harrison Sterling, a ruthless, brilliant investor who relied heavily on my forensic accounting firm to vet his potential acquisitions. I pressed the call button, activated the speakerphone, and deliberately placed the sleek device right in the absolute center of the immaculate dining table right next to my mother, perfectly roasted Thanksgiving turkey. The phone rang loudly, the electronic sound echoing through the dead silent room. My father gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning completely white. Jada stopped breathing, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen. On the third ring, the line clicked open. "Kendra, my absolute favorite auditor," Harrison Sterling answered, his deep, polished voice filling the dining room clearly. "Happy Thanksgiving to you. I hope you are enjoying a well-deserved break. You have saved my firm millions this quarter. To what do I owe the pleasure of a holiday phone call?" My mother gasped softly, her manicured hand flying up to cover her mouth in pure shock. The sheer amount of professional respect radiating from Harrison's voice was undeniable. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my tone warm and conversational. "Happy Thanksgiving, Harrison. I apologize for interrupting your holiday evening, but I have a very quick professional question regarding one of your pending deals. Are you currently reviewing a term sheet for an artificial intelligence startup called Neural Nexus? It is operated by a man named Trent." There was a heavy, pregnant pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of jazz music playing in the background of Harrison's home. When he finally spoke again, his tone had shifted from warm holiday greetings to sharp, razor-cold business. "Neural Nexus," Harrison repeated, letting out a deep, frustrated sigh. "Yes, we were actually just discussing that absolute disaster of a company this morning. It is funny you bring that specific name up, Kendra. Why do you ask?" "I am just doing a little informal networking," I replied smoothly, watching Trent's face turn from pale ash to a sickening shade of gray. "I was told they just secured a massive $10 million term sheet from your firm. I wanted to verify the integrity of the valuation." Harrison let out a loud, mocking laugh that cut through the tension in our dining room like a sharp knife. $10 million, absolutely not. We did issue a preliminary term sheet last week, subject to our standard strict due diligence process. However, my internal tech team flagged some massive, glaring anomalies in their data room exactly 48 hours ago. We pulled the offer entirely this morning. "Anomalies," I prompted, gently locking my eyes directly onto Trent. "Could you clarify what kind of anomalies your team discovered?" "The worst kind imaginable," Harrison explained, his voice dripping with professional disgust. The founder, Trent, completely forged his user metrics. He claimed to have 10,000 active daily enterprise users, but our engineers discovered he was just running a simple bot script to artificially inflate the server traffic. Even worse, the so-called proprietary algorithm he tried to sell us was entirely plagiarized. He literally copy and pasted open source code from a public repository and tried to pass it off as revolutionary machine learning technology. It is a complete unmitigated scam. Jada let out a sharp, horrified squeak. My father sank back into his heavy dining chair as if he had been physically struck. That is incredibly insightful, Harrison, I said calmly. So Apex Capital Partners has no intention of funding Neural Nexus. We are completely severing all ties, Harrison confirmed aggressively. In fact, our legal department is currently drafting a formal cease and desist letter right now. We are demanding he stop using our firm name to solicit other naive investors. The man is an absolute con artist, Kendra. If you cross paths with him in the Atlanta tech scene, run the other way. He is going to end up facing serious federal wire fraud charges before the end of the year. I appreciate the warning, Harrison. Enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving. You too, Kendra. Let us catch up on Tuesday. I tapped the screen, ending the call. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The grand illusion my family had built around Trent was completely shattered, laid bare for everyone to see. I looked at Trent, offering him a sweet, devastating smile. Trent let out a primal, furious roar, violently sweeping his arm across the table in a blind rage. He knocked my expensive phone completely off the polished wood, sending the device flying across the room to hit the wall. At the exact same time, his swinging arm collided violently with a crystal wine glass. The delicate crystal shattered into dozens of sharp, glittering pieces across the hardwood floor. Red wine splashed wildly across the expensive imported rug, leaving a dark, jagged stain that looked exactly like fresh blood. Trent stood there panting heavily, his chest heaving up and down as he stared at the destroyed glass. The absolute silence returned, heavier and far more suffocating than before. Then a high-pitched, piercing wail erupted from the opposite end of the long table. Jada had finally processed the catastrophic reality of the speakerphone call. She grabbed the edges of her flawless hair, her manicured nails digging deep into her scalp, as her beautiful face twisted into a mask of pure panic. She was not crying out of concern for Trent facing severe federal prison time. She was crying because the grand illusion of her endless wealth had just evaporated into thin air. "Tell me he is lying right now," Jada shrieked, her voice cracking violently as she bolted upright from her chair. She pointed an accusing, trembling finger directly at the chest of her husband. "Tell me you did not just lose that $10 million deal, Trent. Look at me right now. Where is the money?" Trent took a quick step backward, stumbling slightly against the hard edge of the dining table. "Jada, baby, please calm down. I can fix this massive misunderstanding. I just need to quickly pivot the entire business model and find a different group of angel investors." Apex Capital Partners was not the right fit for my long-term vision anyway. "Pivot!" Jada screamed at the top of her lungs, her dark eyes widening with absolute terror as she aggressively grabbed her diamond tennis bracelet, almost as if she was afraid it would turn to dust right on her wrist. "There is absolutely no time left to pivot. What about the massive winter trip to Gstad? I literally just booked the luxury ski chalet this morning. I put $80,000 on the platinum card because you explicitly swore the venture capital funds were hitting our joint account next week. What about the custom Birkin bag I special ordered, the massive cash deposit on the new Range Rover?" My father gasped loudly, tightly gripping his chest. $80,000 on a single credit card? Marcus asked weakly, looking completely sick. Trent's face flushed with a sudden, deeply defensive anger. He glared harshly at Jada, completely dropping the loving, supportive husband act he had been playing all night long. "You greedy, incredibly superficial nightmare," Trent yelled loudly, throwing his hands up in the air defensively. "Do not stand there crying and acting like an innocent victim. You knew exactly what I was doing the entire time." "I did not know anything!" Jada cried defensively, taking a quick step back toward our mother for protection. You are a massive liar, Trent spat, stepping aggressively toward her. You sat right next to me in the home office while I programmed the bot farm to fake the user engagement numbers. You literally laughed out loud about it. You told me that in the influencer world, everyone buys fake followers and artificial engagement. You said it was just standard marketing practice to fake it until we make it. You specifically pushed me to forge those metric reports so you could keep posting pictures from private jets and pretend you were married to the next major tech billionaire. Vivian gasped loudly, looking between her golden child and her white son-in-law with pure, unadulterated horror. Jada, Vivian whispered slowly, her voice trembling with fear. Tell me he is making this terrible story up. Jada burst into loud, hysterical tears, aggressively stomping her expensive designer heel against the ruined rug. I only did it because I had a crucial public image to maintain. Do you have any idea how much intense pressure I am under to look perfectly wealthy online? Everyone expects me to be a rich socialite. If I stop posting luxury content, I will lose all my brand deals. Trent promised me he would figure out the actual software coding part later. He said the fake numbers would just get our foot in the door with the investors. I only did it to pay for your ridiculous out-of-control spending habits, Trent roared back at her furiously. You burned through $30,000 a single month on clothes, skin treatments, and ridiculous lifestyle content. I was drowning in your massive debt. I had to fabricate the growth charts just to secure a bridge loan to keep us financially afloat. I sat perfectly still, quietly watching the two of them absolutely destroy each other right over the Thanksgiving turkey. The golden couple, the absolute pride and joy of my parents' fake high society life, was tearing themselves apart. Trent was a complete fraud, and Jada was his highly willing accomplice. They had built an entire marriage on lies, massive credit card debt, and stolen intellectual property. The brutal reality of the situation finally hit my mother. The pristine, flawless reputation she cared about more than oxygen was now completely shattered into pieces. The son-in-law she bragged about to her church friends was a blatant criminal. Her perfect daughter was a broke, fraudulent accomplice. The sheer public humiliation of it all was far too much for Vivian to process rationally. She desperately needed a target to attack. She needed a scapegoat to blame. Like a heat-seeking missile, her furious gaze locked directly onto me. Vivian marched quickly around the dining table, her face twisted with a dark, vicious rage. She stopped right beside my chair, her fists clenched so tightly her manicured nails dug painfully into her own palms. You planned this entire thing, Vivian hissed loudly, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, venomous intensity. You sat there all evening quietly waiting for the perfect moment to completely humiliate your sister. You called that investor on purpose just to ruin this family. I looked at my mother completely unfazed. I did not force Trent to commit wire fraud, Mom. I did not force Jada into debt. They ruined themselves. I simply turned on the lights so you could see the cockroaches scurrying across your floor. My calm tone fueled her blinding rage. Vivian slammed her hands onto my chair, leaning so close I smelled wine on her breath. You are just a bitter, deeply jealous woman, Kendra. You have always been jealous of Jada. You cannot stand that she is beautiful, married and secured a high-value man. I stared at her, letting the absurdity hang in the air. Trent was standing nearby, sweating and facing prison, yet my mother viewed him as the ultimate prize because of his race and gender. The toxic colorism and misogynoir that plagued my childhood were suddenly spilling out like toxic poison. Jada has the perfect aesthetic, Vivian screamed. She has lighter skin, gorgeous hair, and grace that attracts wealth. She secured a white husband who would elevate our family status and give me beautiful mixed grandchildren with bright futures. What are you ever giving this family? You are 34, unmarried, and undesirable. You hide behind a screen because no man with real status would want a woman who looks like you. The cruelty caused my father to briefly look away, but he did nothing. Grandpa Elias tightened his grip on his cane, his jaw clenched, but I caught his eye and gave a tiny shake of my head. I did not want him to intervene. I needed Vivian to empty her clip and show everyone exactly who she truly was beneath the designer clothes and smile. You think your accounting degree makes you superior? Vivian shrieked. You think buying this house makes you the matriarch. You are nothing. You are a miserable spinster who will absolutely die alone. You destroy your sister because you know you will never experience love like theirs. I slowly stood up, adjusting the hem of my tailored blazer. I was not angry, just profoundly exhausted by her delusions. If a marriage built on lies, debt, and federal wire fraud is your definition of true love, you are absolutely right. I do not want it. You can keep your fake socialite status, mom. You can keep defending a criminal just because he is white and wears a suit, but you cannot keep living in my house. Vivian glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. The flawless mask she had worn for decades was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered woman willing to say absolutely anything to regain her lost control. She stepped directly into my path, aggressively pointing her shaking, trembling finger right at my chest. "You owe us everything!" Vivian roared, spit flying from her lips as she completely lost all grip on reality. You stand there acting incredibly high and mighty about your money and your precious forensic accounting firm, but you would be absolutely nothing without the massive sacrifices we made for you. We put expensive clothes on your back. We put warm food in your mouth. We gave you the perfectly pristine credit score that allowed you to buy this stupid house in the very first place. I froze. The entire room seemed to suddenly stop spinning. I blinked, processing her exact choice of words. I had built my credit score entirely on my own, carefully managing my finances since the day I turned 18. My parents had never once co-signed a single loan for me or helped me secure any line of credit. In fact, they had explicitly refused to ever help me buy my very first car. But a massive, terrible realization suddenly slammed into my brain with the terrifying force of a speeding freight train. 3 weeks ago, I had received a highly unusual alert from one of my major credit monitoring services. A massive loan application had been initiated using my social security number. I had assumed it was just a random administrative error or a basic phishing scam, and I had immediately flagged it for my security team to investigate after the holiday. I had not given it another thought because I was completely focused on executing this eviction plan tonight. I stared directly into my mother's furious face. The absolute certainty of her statement echoed loudly in my ears. She did not say she gave me a good upbringing. She specifically said she gave me a pristine credit score. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, chilling whisper. Vivian realized her fatal slip up the exact second the words left her mouth. The furious red color drained from her cheeks, leaving her face completely pale. She quickly pulled her hand back, her eyes darting nervously toward my father. Marcus looked completely terrified, his hands shaking violently as he took a step backward toward the kitchen doors. "I just meant," Vivian stammered weakly, her loud, aggressive tone suddenly replaced by a high-pitched, nervous squeak. "I just meant we taught you very good financial habits. We raised you to be incredibly responsible with your money." "Do not lie to me," I commanded sharply, stepping directly toward her. The forensic accountant inside me was fully activated now, rapidly connecting every single dot I had previously missed. "You said you gave me a pristine credit score. You and Dad have been completely bankrupt for 2 years. Trent and Jada have $80,000 in brand new credit card debt. Yet, they somehow managed to secure a massive cash deposit for a luxury ski chalet and a brand new Range Rover while having absolutely zero verifiable corporate income." I turned my head very slowly, firmly locking my furious gaze directly onto my cowering father. The silence in the room was absolutely deafening now. "Marcus, exactly how did Jada and Trent finance their luxury lifestyle after the local bank cut off your second mortgage?" Marcus opened and closed his mouth like a suffocating fish. He looked desperately toward Vivian, seeking permission to speak, but she was entirely paralyzed by her own catastrophic mistake. I did not break eye contact with him. The scattered pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with terrifying precision. 3 weeks prior, a sudden alert had popped up on my premium credit monitoring application. A massive loan application had been flagged under my profile. Because my accounting firm was actively transitioning our secure servers, I had completely dismissed the notification as an annoying administrative glitch caused by our internal data migration. I had explicitly planned to call the credit bureau on Monday morning. Now the chilling truth was staring me right in the face across the Thanksgiving table. I took a slow, highly deliberate step toward my father. "You used my social security number," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. "You stole my personal identity to fund her completely fake life." Jada gasped loudly, clutching her chest dramatically as if she was the actual victim. Trent backed away quietly, hitting the dining room wall. Marcus finally found his voice, though it cracked pathetically under the immense weight of his absolute guilt. "We did not steal anything from you, Kendra. We simply leveraged the available family resources. That is exactly what our people do. We build each other up. Do not you dare weaponize our culture to justify your federal crimes." I shot back immediately, my tone razor sharp. Marcus raised both his hands in a weak, highly defensive gesture. "You have to deeply understand the immense social pressure we are constantly under, Kendra. Black families in our elite circle must constantly project absolute success to maintain our hard-earned seat at the table. When the second mortgage cash ran out, Trent swore to us his artificial intelligence startup would pay us back tenfold within 6 months. We just needed a temporary bridge loan to keep up appearances. Your credit profile was absolutely flawless. You were sitting down in the basement, not even using it. We just borrowed your good name to keep this family financially afloat." "Exactly how much?" I demanded sharply, cutting through his pathetic excuses. Marcus looked down at the ruined wine-stained rug. He could not meet my furious eyes. "How much money did you deliberately steal in my name, Marcus?" He flinched visibly at the harsh use of his first name. $85,000, he whispered quietly into the silent room. "We took out $85,000 in high-interest personal loans and multiple new credit lines." I turned my furious gaze directly toward Jada. $85,000 of my stolen credit," I stated clearly. "That specifically paid for your luxury ski chalet in Gstaad. That paid for the massive cash deposit on your brand new Range Rover. That paid for the custom designer bags you eagerly unbox for your completely fake internet followers." Jada started crying again, shaking her head violently from side to side. "I did not know they used your name to get the cash. I swear to God, I thought Trent actually secured a legitimate bridge loan from a wealthy private investor." Trent scoffed loudly, completely throwing his wife and her desperate parents right under the bus to save his own skin. "I simply told Marcus to secure the required capital. I never explicitly directed him to commit identity theft against his own daughter. This is entirely on your parents, Kendra. I am completely legally insulated from this localized family drama." I laughed, a harsh, deeply bitter sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers above us. "You think you are insulated? You actively received stolen funds across state lines to maintain a fraudulent lifestyle while simultaneously forging corporate documents for venture capital. The federal government will absolutely love dismantling you, Trent." Vivian finally found her voice, stepping forward to fiercely protect her precious failing son-in-law. "You will not call the authorities on your own flesh and blood. We are your parents. We gave you life. You will absorb this debt, you will fix your own credit score, and you will keep your mouth tightly shut to protect the family name." Throughout this entire horrific, rapidly escalating display of pure greed and utter betrayal, my grandfather Elias had remained completely silent at the far end of the long table. He had quietly watched his only son admit to felony identity theft. He had watched his daughter-in-law viciously defend a white con artist over her own hardworking black daughter. He had watched his golden grandchild cry over designer luxury bags instead of showing an ounce of remorse for her sister-ruined credit. He had seen the absolute moral rot rotting his family from the inside out. Now the absolute suffocating silence in the elegant dining room was suddenly broken by a harsh, deeply unpleasant sound. The heavy wooden legs of Grandpa Elias' antique chair scraped loudly and violently against the hardwood floor. He gripped the polished handle of his sturdy walking cane, his knuckles standing out sharply against his dark skin. Rising slowly to his full intimidating height, Elias cast a long, incredibly imposing shadow across the ruined Thanksgiving feast. The tension in the air became instantly electric. Marcus and Vivian instinctively shrank back into their expensive chairs, suddenly realizing that their performative elite status meant absolutely nothing in the face of true, unyielding patriarch authority. Jada stopped her loud weeping, clamping her manicured hands tightly over her trembling mouth. Even Trent, who had spent the entire evening radiating unearned arrogance, took another cautious step backward, his eyes darting nervously toward the front door. Grandpa Elias did not shout. He did not need to. When he finally spoke, his deep, resonant voice carried the heavy, unmistakable weight of absolute finality, freezing the very air in our lungs. "I have heard more than enough of this absolute, unforgivable disgrace here tonight," Elias stated coldly. My grandfather stared down at Marcus, his own flesh and blood, with a look of profound disgust that made my father physically flinch. "I spent 40 years driving trucks through the dead of night, sleeping at rest stops, and breaking my back so this family could build real, tangible wealth." Elias began, his voice rumbling like distant thunder across the room. "I bought my first rig with hard cash, not credit. I built a major logistics empire with pure sweat, painful calluses, and absolute integrity. And what did you do with that legacy, Marcus? You have completely traded it all away for country club memberships you could not afford, leased luxury cars you did not own, and the shallow approval of people who would not spit on you if you were on fire. You became completely obsessed with a fake bourgeois fantasy. You desperately wanted to be part of the Atlanta elite so badly that you sold your own soul, and worse, you sold out your own daughter. You handed over her financial stability to a man who mocks her inside her own home, all so you could attend charity galas and pretend you were wealthy." Vivian opened her mouth to interject, tears of deep humiliation welling in her heavily made-up eyes. "Elias, please try to understand our precarious position. Do not you dare speak to me, Vivian." Elias snapped his wooden cane, striking the floor with a sharp, explosive thud that made the fine crystal glasses rattle. "You have poisoned this family with your relentless vanity and incredibly toxic colorism. You sat at my table for decades playing the role of a devoted matriarch while quietly breaking the spirit of the hardest working person in this entire room. You favored Jada because she fit your shallow aesthetic perfectly, completely ignoring the blatant fact that she has no work ethic, no moral compass, and absolutely no respect for the massive sacrifices made to give her that comfortable life. You knowingly mortgaged your own home to fund a scam, and then you stole Kendra identity to cover your tracks. That is not elite behavior. That is the behavior of pathetic, desperate scavengers. You literally fed your firstborn child to the wolves to buy another season of fake relevance." My parents sat perfectly still, completely dismantled by the unvarnished truth. Elias turned his imposing gaze toward me, and for the first time all evening, the harsh lines around his eyes softened slightly. "Kendra is the only person in this entire house who inherited my blue-collar grit. She did not beg for handouts. She built her forensic accounting career brick by brick. When you two fools threw away your equity on a ridiculous gamble, she stepped in and bought the roof over your heads to save you from complete public ruin. And instead of getting on your knees and thanking her, you demanded rent and called her a failure. You do not even possess a fraction of her stellar character. She is the ultimate definition of what this family was originally supposed to represent before you two completely ruined it." Then the patriarch turned his attention to the far corner of the room. Trent immediately stiffened, trying to straighten his posture, but he looked incredibly small under my grandfather's piercing stare. "And then there is you," Elias said, his voice dripping with absolute unfiltered contempt. "You walked into my family radiating unearned arrogance, acting like you were the grand savior, simply because you wear a custom suit and carry the inherent privilege of your skin color. You used corporate buzzwords to successfully dazzle a couple of desperate social climbers, promising them millions, while you secretly bled them entirely dry. You are not a genius, you are a predator." Trent swallowed hard, raising his trembling hands defensively. Sir, I had a legitimate business plan. The market just shifted unexpectedly. You are a grifter, Elias stated firmly, stepping closer to the white tech brother who had ruined his son. You are a cheap, pathetic con artist hiding behind a tailored suit and a smooth venture capital pitch. You saw a family desperate for validation, and you deliberately exploited their specific insecurities to fund your luxury vacations. You thought you could outsmart all of us. You thought because Marcus and Vivian were blinded by their desperate need for elite status, you could simply extract their wealth and walk away clean. But you severely underestimated Kendra, and you absolutely underestimated me. I built my fortune reading people exactly like you, and I knew from the very first day you sat at my table that you were nothing but a hollow, empty fraud. Elias slowly reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored wool blazer. The entire room watched his hand with bated breath, absolutely terrified of what he was going to do next. I have sat quietly at these holiday dinners for years watching this toxic dynamic fester, Elias declared, pulling out a very thick, sealed envelope made of heavy cream-colored parchment paper. I watched you treat Kendra like a burden, while you worshipped two useless parasites. I wanted to simply see if Marcus would ever finally step up and be a real father, or if Vivian would ever drop her miserable fake socialite act. You absolutely failed every single test. He held the heavy envelope up to the bright light. I saw this exact disaster coming from a mile away. I knew this was inevitable. So I visited my lawyer earlier this week, specifically on Tuesday morning, to make some permanent, extremely severe and non-negotiable adjustments to my entire financial estate. Elias deliberately broke the red wax seal on the back of the envelope, pulling out a freshly printed, incredibly thick legal document. I have officially and permanently updated my last will and testament, and I personally made absolutely certain that it is entirely ironclad, impenetrable, and completely immune to any legal challenges you pathetic scavengers might attempt to throw at it. The heavy parchment paper rustled slightly in my grandfather's steady hands as he unfolded the thick pages. The silence in the dining room was so absolute that I could hear the sharp, frantic breathing of my mother standing just a few feet away. Elias adjusted his reading glasses, his expression completely devoid of any paternal warmth or lingering affection. He looked down at the legal document, clearing his throat with a sound that signaled the absolute end of an era. Effective immediately, Elias read aloud, his deep voice projecting absolute authority. I hereby revoke all previous iterations of my last will and testament. I leave absolutely zero financial assets, zero real property, and zero corporate shares to my son Marcus. Furthermore, I explicitly disinherit my daughter-in-law Vivian and my granddaughter Jada. They shall receive nothing from my estate. Not a single red cent, not a piece of family jewelry, and certainly not a single share of my logistics company. My father let out a strangled, pathetic gasp, his knees buckling slightly as he gripped the edge of the dining table to keep himself from collapsing onto the wine-stained rug. Vivian stared at Elias with wide, horrified eyes, her jaw dropping open as the catastrophic reality of his words finally penetrated her thick skull. She had spent decades kissing up to him, pretending to be the perfect high society daughter-in-law entirely for the promise of his massive inheritance. Now, all of her exhausting fake performances had amounted to absolutely nothing. Jada stood completely frozen, her manicured hands trembling violently at her sides as she processed the devastating fact that her endless safety net had just been permanently shredded into tiny pieces. However, Elias continued, raising his voice to cut through their rising panic, I do not intend to let the business I built with my own two hands fall to complete ruin. Therefore, I am transferring the entirety of my estate to the only person in this room who understands the true value of hard work. I hereby leave 100% of my commercial logistics empire, my entire commercial real estate portfolio, and all of my liquid financial assets, exclusively to my eldest granddaughter, Kendra. The room exploded. Jada let out a piercing, ear-splitting scream that could have shattered the remaining crystal glasses. She stomped her expensive designer heels against the floor, throwing a massive childish temper tantrum right in the middle of our ruined Thanksgiving dinner. "You cannot do this to me!" Jada shrieked hysterically, her perfect makeup completely ruined by a sudden flood of furious tears. "I am your granddaughter, too. I have two beautiful children to raise. How am I supposed to pay for their private school tuition? How am I supposed to maintain my lifestyle? You are giving everything to her just because she sits at a boring desk all day long. This is entirely unfair." "Life is unfair, Jada," Elias shot back immediately, not showing a single ounce of pity for her pathetic display. "But my money is exactly that. My money. I earned it, and I will decide exactly who deserves it. You chose to marry a con artist and finance a fake, shallow life on the back of your sister's stolen credit score. You made your own miserable bed, and now you can lie in it without a single dollar of my hard-earned wealth to cushion your fall." Vivian lunged forward desperately, grabbing my grandfather's dark suit jacket with her shaking hands. "Elias, please reconsider this rash decision. Marcus is your only son. You cannot just cast him out into the cold streets. We will lose our country club memberships. We will be completely ostracized from our entire social circle. Please, I am begging you, do not let this bitter, jealous girl manipulate you into destroying our family legacy." Elias violently brushed her hands off his jacket, stepping away from her with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Kendra did not manipulate me into doing anything, Vivian. I made this decision entirely on my own after watching you people act like greedy, ungrateful vultures for the past 10 years. Your social circle means absolutely nothing to me. Your fake reputation is a disease, and I am finally cutting the infection out of my life permanently." Suddenly, Trent stepped forward from the shadows of the dining room corner. The arrogant, condescending tech brother who had spent the entire evening mocking my career and threatening to evict me had completely vanished. In his place stood a desperate, cowardly man, desperately trying to save his own sinking ship. He smoothed his expensive tie, plastered a sickeningly fake, respectful smile onto his pale face, and turned his attention directly toward my grandfather and me. "Sir," Trent said, his voice dropping to a smooth, incredibly polite register that made my skin crawl with pure revulsion. "I completely understand your immense frustration. Emotions are running incredibly high right now. But as a seasoned businessman yourself, surely you can see the strategic value in keeping the family unified. Kendra, you and I are both intelligent professionals. Now that you have secured this massive capital injection from Elias, we could form a highly lucrative partnership. With your new substantial financial backing and my deep connections in the venture capital world, we could easily restructure Neural Nexus and make millions together. We do not have to let personal disagreements ruin a golden business opportunity." I stared at Trent, completely stunned by his breathtaking audacity. He was actively facing federal wire fraud charges, his fraudulent term sheet had just been pulled, and his entire life was collapsing around him. Yet he still possessed the sheer, unmitigated white male privilege to stand in my dining room and ask me to fund his fake company using my new inheritance. The sheer absurdity of his request bubbled up inside my chest. I threw my head back and laughed directly at his sudden, pathetic subservience, then pulled out a folder. I threw my head back and let out a sharp, amused laugh that completely silenced Trent. His smile immediately faltered. I stopped laughing, letting the cold reality of my gaze pin him right where he stood. "You want me to partner with you?" I asked, my voice dripping with pure incredulity. "You want the forensic accountant who just exposed your entirely fabricated venture capital deal to hand you millions of my grandfather's hard-earned money?" Trent nervously adjusted his tie, his throat bobbing. "We can synergize, Kendra. We can leverage this capital." "I do not synergize with felons," I stated flatly. I reached into my tote bag one final time, withdrawing a thick red manila folder. I slammed it down onto the dining room table right next to the eviction notice. "I did not come here just to eat dry turkey and listen to your ridiculous lectures on wealth building. I came here tonight to deliver a highly specific, meticulously compiled package." Vivian stared at the red folder, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. What else could you possibly have, Kendra? You already took the house. What more do you want from us? I want accountability, I replied, tapping the thick red folder with my manicured index finger. This is not just a collection of bank statements. This is a comprehensive court-ready financial dossier. It contains every single fraudulent wire transfer Trent initiated across state lines. It contains the exact IP addresses he used to artificially inflate his user metrics. It contains the forged loan applications Marcus and Vivian submitted using my social security number to secure that $85,000. I tracked every single penny that flowed from my stolen credit profile directly to Jada luxury purchases. Marcus groaned, clutching his stomach as if he might be physically sick. You built a criminal case against your parents, Kendra. You cannot do this. We can pay you back. I will get a second job. It is far too late for payment plans, Marcus, I said, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms over my chest. I am a legally bound financial professional. When I discovered this identity theft operation linked directly to wire fraud, I did not just print it out to show you at dinner. I submitted this entire dossier to the federal authorities and the local fraud division exactly 4 days ago. Jada let out a piercing, terrified shriek. You called the police on us. Are you completely insane? I protected myself, I corrected her sharply. When you steal someone's identity, you leave them liable for your massive debts. I had to file a police report to freeze the fraudulent accounts and clear my credit score. The authorities took one look at Trent's completely fake corporate filings and immediately elevated the entire investigation. Trent took 2 rapid steps backward, his eyes darting frantically around the elegant dining room. You handed this to the feds. Kendra, do you have any idea what you have done? They issue warrants. As if perfectly cued by his rising panic, a loud, incredibly aggressive pounding echoed from the front of the house. The heavy brass knocker slammed repeatedly against the wood, followed by 3 sharp knocks that rattled the expensive stained glass windows. Vivian screamed, throwing her hands over her ears. Marcus froze completely in his chair, his eyes wide with absolute terror. Jada scrambled backward, tripping over the hem of her expensive designer dress as she tried to put distance between herself and her husband. Atlanta Police Department! A deep, commanding voice shouted through the heavy wooden door. Open the door immediately. Grandpa Elias did not look surprised in the slightest. He simply adjusted his tailored suit jacket, picked up his sturdy wooden cane, and slowly walked toward the grand entryway to let the officers inside. He unlatched the heavy deadbolt, swinging the front door wide open to reveal 4 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives standing on the front porch. The flashing red and blue lights from their parked squad cars outside cast erratic, terrifying shadows across our formal dining room walls. The lead detective stepped into the grand foyer, his eyes sweeping over the ruined Thanksgiving feast and the terrified faces of my family members. He held up a thick stack of official paperwork that looked suspiciously identical to the red folder sitting right in front of me. We have active arrest warrants, the lead detective announced loudly, his stern voice cutting through the suffocating tension in the room. We are looking for Trent Sterling and Vivian Hayes. Step forward immediately. Vivian let out a guttural, heartbroken wail, collapsing onto her knees right beside the dining table. She buried her face in her hands, completely destroyed by the ultimate public humiliation of being arrested in her own home. The elite, high society reputation she cared about more than her own daughter was now officially dead and buried permanently. Trent did not surrender. The arrogant, condescending tech brother realized his inherent privilege was not going to save him from federal prison. He spun around wildly, his eyes locking onto the swinging doors leading directly into the gourmet kitchen. Beyond the kitchen lay the back patio and the sprawling, unlit backyard. I am not going to jail for this, Trent yelled frantically. He abandoned his wife, shoved past his terrified father-in-law, and sprinted in a blind panic straight toward the kitchen doors. He pushed through them violently, making a desperate, pathetic dash for the heavy glass sliding doors at the back of the house. I did not even flinch. I calmly reached into my tailored blazer, pulled out my smartphone, and opened my comprehensive smart home security application. With one simple, highly satisfying tap of my thumb, I engaged the electronic deadbolts across the entire property instantly. A loud, definitive click echoed through the quiet house. Trent slammed his body forcefully against the glass back doors, but they absolutely did not budge a single inch. Trent rebounded off the thick glass of the back patio doors, his tailored suit jacket snagging against the handle. He frantically twisted the lock, but my smart home security system had overridden the manual latch. He was trapped inside the gourmet kitchen, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. The heavy footsteps of the Atlanta Police Department echoed loudly against the hardwood floors of the grand foyer as they marched directly toward him. The lead detective, a tall, broad-shouldered man with an impassive expression, pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, followed closely by two uniformed officers. Their hands rested professionally but intimidatingly on their utility belts. Trent immediately tried to deploy the exact weapon he had used his entire life to escape the consequences of his own actions. He straightened his posture, smoothed his ruined jacket, and attempted to project the supreme, unearned confidence of a wealthy white male facing a minor administrative misunderstanding. "Officers, there has been a ridiculous mistake here," Trent declared, forcing a loud, patronizing laugh that echoed in the tense room. "I am the chief executive officer of a major technology corporation based right here in Atlanta. This is simply a civil dispute over a minor business contract. You do not need to be here at all. I know the local district attorney very well, and I can assure you that my corporate legal team will have this sorted out by tomorrow morning." The lead detective did not even blink. He did not offer a polite smile, and he certainly did not defer to Trent and his projected authority. He simply pulled a pair of heavy silver steel handcuffs from his belt. "Trent Sterling," the detective stated, his voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. "You are officially under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, interstate financial deception, and the deliberate falsification of corporate documents. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The absolute crushing reality of those famous Miranda rights finally penetrated Trent's thick skull. The arrogant, condescending tech brother facade instantly evaporated into thin air. He took another desperate step backward, his back hitting the stainless steel refrigerator. "No, wait, you do not understand," Trent pleaded frantically, his voice cracking violently as his manufactured composure completely shattered. "I am an innovator. I am securing venture capital. I am a legitimate businessman. You cannot arrest me like some common street criminal. I demand to make a phone call right now." One of the uniformed officers stepped forward rapidly, grabbing Trent by the shoulder and spinning him around forcefully against the cold metal appliance. The unmistakable sound of the metal handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists echoed sharply through the kitchen. The physical reality of the cold steel binding his hands finally broke him. Trent let out a loud, pathetic sob, his knees buckling slightly as the officers held him upright. He twisted his neck, looking desperately through the open kitchen doors into the dining room where my sister was standing perfectly still. "Jada!" Trent screamed, hot tears streaming rapidly down his pale face. "Jada, please help me. Call my parents in Connecticut right now. Tell them to wire the bail money immediately. Call my father and tell him to get his legal team down here tonight. Jada, do not just stand there." Jada slowly walked forward, stopping just at the threshold of the kitchen. She looked down at her handcuffed husband, but there was no love or concern in her dark eyes. Instead, her face was twisted into a mask of pure disgust. She was tightly clutching her expensive smartphone to her chest like a protective shield. She did not see a husband facing the darkest moment of his entire life. She only saw a massive, catastrophic public relations disaster that was going to permanently ruin her carefully curated digital aesthetic. "Are you completely insane?" Jada shrieked, taking a large, deliberate step backward away from him. "Do you have any idea what this is going to do to my personal brand? I have a major sponsorship deal with a luxury skincare line launching next week. The police cars are parked right on our front lawn, Trent. The wealthy neighbors are filming this entire spectacle from their front porches right now. If my internet followers find out my husband is a broke, fraudulent criminal, I will lose every single one of my lucrative brand partnerships. My entire influencer career is completely over because of you. Trent stared at her in sheer horrified disbelief, realizing in his darkest moment that his beautiful wife cared far more about her online aesthetic than his actual freedom. I did all of this to pay for your ridiculous lifestyle, he wailed loudly as the officers began marching him firmly toward the front door. You are my wife. You are supposed to stand by me. Jada aggressively turned her back on him furiously, typing on her phone, likely deleting every picture of him from her social media accounts to distance herself from the incoming scandal. The officers dragged Trent out of the kitchen, his pathetic sobs fading as they shoved him through the front doors and out into the flashing lights of the waiting patrol cars. The front door slammed shut behind him. The lead detective remained standing in the grand foyer. He slowly turned around, his piercing gaze sweeping over the remaining members of my family. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the red manila folder I had submitted to the Financial Fraud Division earlier that week. He opened the cover, pulling out a specific stack of highlighted forged bank applications. He stepped directly into the dining room, walking straight toward my mother. Vivian Hayes, the detective announced, clearly holding up the falsified loan documents bearing my stolen social security number. The sharp, unmistakable, and terrifying sound of her own name hanging in the cold air finally shattered the delicate, carefully constructed reality my mother had lived inside for over 30 long years. Vivian stared blankly at the thick stack of forged loan documents securely clutched in the hand of the lead detective. Her perfectly manicured fingers began to tremble violently. The realization that her elite socialite status could not shield her from federal law enforcement crashed over her like a tidal wave. She looked wildly around the dining room, her eyes darting from the ruined Thanksgiving turkey to the stern faces of the arresting officers. She let out a gasp, stumbling backward until her silk blouse caught against the edge of the mahogany table. The detective stepped forward with purpose, completely ignoring her panic. He began reading her the exact same Miranda rights his partner had just forcefully recited to Trent moments prior. The delivery of those legal warnings completely broke whatever composure my mother had left. Vivian let out a loud wail that tore through the quiet house. She collapsed heavily onto the dark wine-stained rug, ignoring the sharp shards of broken crystal scattered across the floor. She ignored the police officers and turned her entire desperate focus directly toward me. "Kendra, please!" Vivian screamed hysterically, tears streaming rapidly down her cheeks and ruining her makeup. She reached her shaking hands out toward my legs, her voice cracking with absolute terror. "You have to tell them this is a massive mistake. Tell them you gave me permission to use your profile. I am your mother. I carried you in my womb. You cannot send me to federal prison." I looked down at the cruel woman who had deliberately spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. I felt nothing. No pity, no sorrow, and no guilt. "You sent yourself to prison the moment you decided my financial future was collateral damage for your fake lifestyle," I stated firmly, my voice echoing clearly across the chaotic room. Vivian dragged herself closer, sobbing violently. Her shoulders shook. "I will change, Kendra. I swear to God I will change everything today. I will respect you. I will treat you like you deserve to be treated. I will love you more than Jada. I will be the perfect mother you always wanted. Please, call them off right now." I took a slow, deliberate step backward, pulling myself out of her desperate reach. The manipulation in her promises disgusted me far more than the identity theft ever did. She was not sorry for ruining my credit, she was only sorry she got caught. "You do not get to bargain with maternal affection, Mom," I said, my tone cold. "A mother love and respect should be unconditional from the beginning. It should not require a federal hostage situation or the threat of a prison sentence to materialize. If the only reason you are willing to act like a decent parent is because there is a detective standing behind you with a pair of steel handcuffs, then your love is completely worthless to me. I do not want it, and I am not dropping these charges to buy it." The lead detective had seen enough of the dramatic display. He signaled firmly to the female officer standing by the doorway. She moved quickly across the dining room, grabbing my mother firmly by the upper arms and hauling her forcefully up from the floor. Vivian shrieked wildly, desperately, thrashing her shoulders back and forth as the officer expertly twisted her arms behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs securing her wrists echoed loudly, symbolizing the absolute death of her high society reign. "Marcus, do something right now." Vivian sobbed hysterically, twisting her neck to look at her husband. "Do not let them take me out there. The neighbors will see me. Please." The officers did not give my father a chance to respond. They marched Vivian aggressively through the grand foyer, leading her straight toward the wide open front doors. The freezing, cool November air drifted inside, bringing with it the harsh, blinding glare of the red and blue police cruiser lights. As they shoved my mother out onto the front porch, the ultimate nightmare she had spent decades trying to avoid played out in vivid color. The flashing sirens had drawn out every single wealthy, gossiping neighbor on the entire block. The elite African-American socialites she had desperately tried to impress for decades were all standing right on their perfectly manicured front lawns. They were holding their cell phones up, actively recording the spectacular, deeply humiliating downfall of Vivian Hayes as she was dragged down her own driveway in steel handcuffs. She tried to hide her face, weeping loudly as the camera flashes illuminated her absolute disgrace. The front door slammed shut forcefully, cutting off the loud, pathetic sounds of my mother weeping in the back of the police car. The sudden, heavy silence inside the dining room was completely suffocating. Jada was still frozen in the corner, shaking and staring blankly at the empty space where her mother had just been arrested. My father Marcus looked completely and utterly broken and utterly defeated. The prestigious, untouchable life he had sacrificed everything to build was officially gone forever. His son-in-law was a known fraudulent criminal. His wife was in police custody, and his house belonged entirely to the daughter he had deeply despised. His legs gave out completely. Marcus fell heavily to his knees on the ruined carpet. He did not look at me. Instead, he turned his tear-streaked face directly toward the imposing figure standing silently at the end of the table. Marcus clasped his shaking hands together, looking up with absolute naked desperation. He begged Grandpa Elias to immediately intervene, crying out for the powerful patriarch to use his massive wealth and immense influence to somehow save their completely destroyed family name from this absolute nightmare tonight. My grandfather did not reach out to comfort his weeping son. Elias stood perfectly rigid at the head of the ruined dining table, his large hands resting heavily on the smooth, polished handle of his wooden cane. He looked down at Marcus with an expression of absolute freezing coldness. There was no pity in his dark eyes, only the harsh, immovable judgment of a man watching his greatest disappointment finally face reality. Marcus sobbed loudly, his tears dripping onto the wine-stained rug as he pleaded for financial rescue. He begged for a team of expensive corporate lawyers. He begged for Elias to make a phone call to the chief of police. He cried out that the proud legacy of their prestigious African-American lineage was being permanently destroyed by a public scandal. Elias let him weep for a long, agonizing moment before he finally spoke. His voice was incredibly deep, vibrating through the quiet room like a final, devastating verdict. "You are asking me to save a reputation that you deliberately built on lies, theft, and utter vanity," Elias stated firmly. "You want me to write a massive check to bail out a woman who stole her own daughter's identity. You want me to protect a man who mortgaged his soul to impress a bunch of fake gossiping socialites. I will do absolutely no such thing." Marcus gasped, clutching his chest, as if he had been physically struck. "Dad, please, you cannot just abandon us." "I am not abandoning you," Elias corrected sharply, stepping closer to his kneeling son. "I am simply allowing you to finally reap the exact harvest you so carelessly sowed. You spent your entire adult life chasing a fragile, pathetic illusion of wealth. You discarded basic morality and turned your back on the hard-working daughter who actually inherited my grit. You sat by and watched Vivian mentally abuse Kendra for decades simply because she did not fit your shallow, toxic aesthetic. Now, you have absolutely nothing left. Your fake, arrogant son-in-law is headed to federal prison for corporate wire fraud. Your cruel, materialistic wife is sitting in a cold holding cell, facing felony identity theft charges. You do not own this beautiful house, Marcus. You do not have a single dollar left in your bank accounts. You traded your integrity for country club memberships, and now the bill has finally come due. Marcus buried his face in his shaking hands, letting out a loud, pathetic wail of pure despair. The absolute totality of his complete ruin crashed down upon his shoulders. He was entirely broken. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his eyes wide and pleading silently, begging his discarded daughter for a shred of mercy. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my face remaining an unreadable mask of calm indifference. I did not offer him a single word of comfort. The silence in the dining room stretched out heavy and suffocating. Elias tapped his wooden cane firmly against the hardwood floor, demanding Marcus return his attention to him. You cried about our family name being completely destroyed tonight. Elias continued, his tone remaining razor-sharp and completely unforgiving. Let me make one thing perfectly clear to you right now. Our family name is not destroyed. The legacy I built with blood, sweat, and decades of manual labor is entirely safe. It is completely secure because it now rests exclusively in the highly capable hands of Kendra. She is a brilliant, ruthless forensic accountant who buys foreclosed mansions with cash and dismantles corporate fraudsters before dessert is even served. She is the true matriarch of this family now. You are just a broke homeless man who let his own greed destroy his life. Marcus collapsed completely forward, his forehead pressing against the ruined sticky carpet. He had no counter-arguments left. The patriarch of the family had spoken his final, devastating truth, permanently, severing Marcus from the generational wealth he had so desperately coveted. As my father lay weeping on the floor, the heavy reality of the situation finally shifted the energy in the room. The police sirens outside had faded away into the cold November night, taking my mother and Trent with them. The grand, expensive house suddenly felt incredibly empty, stripped of all its fake, pretentious glamour. I turned my attention away from my broken father and looked across the long dining table. Jada was standing perfectly still in the dark corner of the room. She had watched her arrogant husband get dragged away in steel handcuffs. She had watched her mother get arrested on her own front lawn. She had watched her father lose his entire inheritance and completely break down in tears. Yet her dark eyes were not filled with sorrow or remorse. They were calculating, darting rapidly around the luxurious room as she desperately tried to figure out a new strategy for survival. The golden child realized she had absolutely no money, no credit, and no provider left to fund her lavish influencer lifestyle. She wiped her ruined makeup from her cheeks with a tissue, taking a deep, shaky breath to finally compose herself. Jada slowly stepped out of the dark, shadowy corner, completely ignoring her weeping father, crying on the floor. She walked directly toward me, forcing a remarkably fake, sympathetic smile onto her lips. She reached out eagerly, attempting to gently grab my right hand, completely switching her entire fake persona in a matter of mere seconds. Kendra, my amazing big sister. Jada purred softly, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and desperate manipulation. This has been such a horrific, traumatizing night for both of us. Trent and Mom lied to me today. I had absolutely no idea they were doing those terrible things to you. Since I am basically a single mother now, and you own this gigantic, beautiful house all by yourself, I was wondering if my two young kids and I could just move upstairs into your massive master suite forever. I stared down at her perfectly manicured hand, and I slowly pulled my arm away. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her request hung heavily in the chilling air. Just 10 minutes ago, she was laughing at my expense and cheering as her fraudulent husband threatened to throw me out on the street. Now, with the flashing police lights gone and her endless supply of stolen cash dried up, she wanted to play the role of the victimized sister, seeking refuge in my bedroom. You have absolutely got to be kidding me, Jada, I said, my voice completely flat. Do you honestly believe I am going to let you move into my house after everything you just did? Jada let out a pathetic gasp, her dark eyes widening. Kendra, please. You cannot blame me for the terrible things Trent and Mom did behind my back. I am a victim here too. I am a newly single mother with two innocent babies to feed, and I have absolutely nowhere else to go. We are sisters. Do not you dare weaponize sisterhood or solidarity to excuse your own disgusting greed. I snapped sharply, taking a firm step toward her. You are not a victim, Jada. You are a highly willing accomplice. You sat in that home office and actively watched your husband program fake user metrics to secure venture capital. You knew exactly where the money was coming from, and you did not care who got destroyed in the process as long as you got your precious designer bags. Jada crossed her arms defensively over her chest, her fake sweetness rapidly evaporating into bitter resentment. I have an important brand to maintain. I am a highly respected lifestyle influencer. I cannot just post pictures from a tiny rundown apartment. My followers expect a certain standard of luxury from me. You are 31 years old, Jada, I stated coldly, completely dismantling her pathetic illusion. You are a fully grown adult woman who has never worked a single honest day in her entire life. Your influencer career is an absolute sham built entirely on credit card debt and federal wire fraud. It is time for you to finally wake up and join the real world. You are going to do something you have successfully avoided for over a decade. You are going to get a real job. Jada recoiled violently, as if I had physically slapped her across the face. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated horror. A job. You want me to get a regular 9-to-5 job, like some kind of miserable peasant. I do not have a college degree. I do not have a resume. I cannot just go work at a retail store or sit in a boring cubicle like you do. That would completely destroy my entire aesthetic. Your aesthetic is a crime scene, I replied mercilessly. I will not give you free rent in my house, and I will certainly not fund your superficial online presence. Jada's lower lip began to tremble violently. She looked frantically toward Grandpa Elias, hoping the patriarch would somehow intervene and save her from the horrifying prospect of manual labor. Elias simply leaned heavily on his wooden cane, his face an unreadable mask of solid stone, completely indifferent to her rising panic. But what about my babies? Jada wailed, trying to use her children as the ultimate emotional bargaining chip. Are you really going to let your own beautiful niece and nephew suffer out on the cold streets just because you are mad at me? You are a monster, Kendra. Your children are the only innocent people in this entire catastrophic mess, I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured. Which is exactly why I am going to protect their future from you. I will not let them suffer for your catastrophic financial failures. Tomorrow morning, I am instructing my corporate lawyers to establish a strictly controlled educational trust fund specifically for your two children. Jada stopped crying instantly. A greedy spark of hope ignited in her dark eyes. A trust fund? Really? Oh my goodness, Kendra, thank you. That will cover our rent and living expenses so perfectly. You did not listen to a single word I just said. I quickly interrupted, completely crushing her momentary joy. The trust fund is for their education and their fundamental medical needs only. It will be fiercely managed by an independent third-party fiduciary firm. Every single dollar will be paid directly to the schools, the pediatricians, and the verified childcare providers. The money will never flow through your hands. You will not have access to a single dime of cash. You cannot use it for groceries, you cannot use it for rent, and you certainly cannot use it to buy a new designer purse. The absolute finality of my decree hit Jada like a ton of heavy bricks. The realization that she was permanently cut off from my massive new inheritance finally settled deep into her bones. She was entirely broke. Her husband was going to federal prison, her mother was in a holding cell, and her wealthy sister was legally blocking her from ever touching a single cent of the family fortune. The golden child had absolutely nothing left but her own monumental failure. Jada's face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She let out an ear-piercing guttural scream of absolute fury. She spun around wildly, her eyes landing directly on the center of the ruined dining room table. Without a single second of hesitation, Jada aggressively grabbed the large, heavy silver platter holding my mother perfectly roasted, untouched Thanksgiving turkey. With a massive heave of her arms, Jada violently hurled the massive bird directly onto the hardwood floor. The heavy platter shattered, grease and meat splashing wildly across the expensive rug. She screamed one last bitter curse at me before turning around and storming fiercely out the front door, disappearing completely into the dark, freezing November night. The heavy oak front door slammed shut with a thunderous impact that violently shook the framed artwork hanging along the hallway walls. The final echoing boom signaled the absolute end of an era. The suffocating toxicity that had plagued my entire existence was finally gone, banished out into the freezing November night. I stood perfectly still in the center of the devastated dining room, slowly taking in the catastrophic aftermath of our Thanksgiving dinner. The expensive imported rug was permanently ruined by thick pools of dark red wine and the scattered greasy remnants of my mother perfectly roasted turkey. Shards of shattered crystal wine glasses sparkled dangerously under the bright chandelier lights. The physical destruction of the room perfectly mirrored the absolute dismantling of my parents' fake high society illusion. I let out a long, shuddering breath, feeling a massive, invisible weight physically lift off my tired shoulders. For the first time in 34 years, the house was completely silent. I turned my attention away from the ruined feast and looked toward the head of the long wooden table. My grandfather Elias was still standing there. He calmly reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a crisp white handkerchief, and meticulously wiped a stray drop of spilled wine from the polished mahogany wood. He did not look angry, nor did he look sad about the spectacular implosion of his only son. Instead, he looked profoundly relieved. Elias slowly sank back into his heavy dining chair, resting both of his large, calloused hands heavily on the smooth handle of his wooden cane. He looked up at me, his dark, sharp eyes shining with a rare, unfiltered emotion I had never fully seen directed at me before. It was absolute, unadulterated pride. "Well," Elias said, his deep voice breaking the heavy silence with a warm, rumbling chuckle. "That was certainly the most entertaining Thanksgiving dinner I have attended in my entire life. You handled those absolute vultures with the precision of a seasoned battlefield commander, Kendra. You did not even flinch when they tried to tear you down." I walked over to the table, carefully sidestepping the greasy turkey meat scattered across the floor, and pulled out the chair directly next to him. I sat down suddenly, feeling the intense physical exhaustion of the evening seeping deep into my bones. "I was terrified on the inside, Grandpa," I admitted quietly, offering him a small, exhausted smile. "I spent my entire childhood desperately trying to earn their basic approval. Watching them actively defend a white corporate criminal over their own hardworking daughter was the final wake-up call I needed. I realized tonight that I could buy them the entire world, and they would still treat me like dirt, simply because I do not fit their shallow, incredibly toxic aesthetic." Elias reached out, placing his warm, heavy hand gently over mine. The rough, thick calluses on his palms were a constant physical reminder of the decades of grueling manual labor he had endured to build our family wealth. "They are blind, Kendra," Elias stated firmly, his voice filled with absolute certainty. Marcus and Vivian became so completely obsessed with impressing the Atlanta elite that they lost their moral compass decades ago. They favored your sister because she played their pathetic, superficial game. But I never played that game. I watched you sitting in the shadows, quietly studying, relentlessly working 70 hours a week, and building your forensic accounting firm from absolute scratch. You never complained about the blatant colorism. You never begged for a single handout. You just kept your head down and built your own impenetrable fortress. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the ruined dining room one more time before locking back onto my face. "I built a massive logistics empire by reading people, Kendra. I always knew Marcus was weak. I knew he lacked the fundamental grit required to sustain real wealth. I watched him mortgage his soul for country club memberships and luxury cars. But I also watched you. I watched you quietly buy the very roof over their heads to save them from public ruin, even while they charged you rent to live in the basement. That level of strategic, cold-blooded financial genius is exactly what this family actually needs to survive the next century. I looked at him, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic beat against my ribs. I just wanted to protect the equity you worked so hard to build, Grandpa. I could not let the bank take this property. You did more than protect a house, Elias corrected me sharply. You completely neutralized a major threat to our entire bloodline. Trent would have bled this family entirely dry, and Marcus would have let him do it just to brag about his tech founder son-in-law. You surgically extracted the cancer from our family tree tonight. Elias slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket. He reached deep into his inner pocket and pulled out a heavy, incredibly thick ring of brass keys. They clinked together loudly, the metallic sound ringing with immense significance. I instantly recognized the distinctive heavy gold keychain attached to the ring. It bore the engraved logo of his massive multi-million-dollar commercial logistics corporation. He gently placed the heavy set of keys directly onto the polished wooden table, sliding them across the smooth surface until they rested right in front of my hands. I am 78 years old, Kendra, Elias said, his voice dropping to a serious, deeply formal register. I am tired of running the board meetings, and I am certainly tired of dealing with corporate executives who lack your ruthless precision. My company needs a leader who can spot financial fraud from a mile away and who has the absolute spine to execute hard decisions without hesitation. I updated my will to protect my assets, but I am not waiting until I die to pass the torch. The keys to the master office are yours. The morning after Thanksgiving was remarkably beautifully quiet. For the first time since I had moved into the basement, there were no heavy footsteps pacing above my head, no shrill demands from Vivian about polishing the silver, and no obnoxious phone calls from Trent echoing through the air vents. I walked upstairs at 7 in the morning holding a steaming mug of black coffee and stood in the center of the grand foyer. My father, Marcus, was already awake. He was dragging two large, scuffed leather suitcases down the sweeping, curved staircase. He looked like he had aged 20 years overnight. His posture, usually so rigid and obsessed with projecting absolute superiority, was completely hunched. The expensive designer suit he wore the night before had been replaced by a wrinkled, oversized sweater. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking at me with bloodshot eyes. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the obedient, desperate daughter to suddenly emerge, apologize for the chaos, and tell him he could stay. I took a slow sip of my coffee, my face completely impassive. Leave the keys to the front door and the garage on the kitchen island, I instructed quietly. My security team is arriving at 10 o'clock to change all the digital locks and recalibrate the alarm system, but I want your physical copies accounted for. Marcus flinched. Kendra, he whispered, his voice cracking. It's freezing outside. I only have a few $100s in my checking account. Most of my friends from the country club, they won't even answer my calls this morning. The news about your mother's arrest has already spread through our entire social circle. Where am I supposed to go? That is a logistical problem you should have considered before you decided to use my social security number to finance a Range Rover, I replied, feeling absolutely no pity. There is an extended stay motel near the interstate. It is not the Ritz-Carlton, but it will keep you out of the freezing wind. Your Uber is waiting at the end of the driveway. He stared at me for a long time, realizing that the bridge between us wasn't just burned, it had been entirely vaporized. He silently placed his keys on the marble counter, grabbed his suitcases, and walked out the front door. I watched the taillights of his rideshare fade down the street, officially cleansing my property of the last remaining parasite. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in relentless, aggressive forensic accounting. I took a temporary leave of absence from my regular firm to dedicate 100% of my time to dismantling the financial mess my parents had created in my name. I sat in bleak fluorescent-lit conference rooms with federal investigators painstakingly walking them through the massive red folder I had compiled. I showed them exactly how Trent had used a series of offshore proxy servers to generate his fake user data. I mapped out the exact digital footprint of the $85,000 identity theft, tracing the fraudulent loans directly to the luxury purchases Jada had brazenly flaunted on her Instagram account. The federal prosecutors were absolutely thrilled. I had essentially gift-wrapped an airtight, undeniable wire fraud and identity theft case for them. The absolute climax of their downfall occurred during the preliminary arraignment hearing in downtown Atlanta. I attended the hearing quietly sitting in the very back row of the grand courtroom wearing a sharp-tailored black suit. When the heavy wooden doors swung open, I almost didn't recognize my own mother. Vivian Hayes, the self-proclaimed queen of the Atlanta elite, was shuffled into the courtroom wearing an oversized, violently bright orange jumpsuit. Her wrists and ankles were chained. Without her expensive silk blouses, her professional blowout, and her flawless makeup, she looked incredibly small. She looked ordinary. The gallery was packed. Word had spread like wildfire through the country club, and the very same wealthy, gossiping socialites Vivian had spent decades trying to impress were sitting in the pews eagerly watching her absolute humiliation. They whispered loudly behind their designer handbags, pointing at her unkempt hair. Trent was brought out next. The arrogant, untouchable tech bro was weeping silently. His assigned public defender looked completely exhausted, clearly realizing she was up against a mountain of federal evidence that could not be argued away. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar crime, looked down at the documents before her. "Mr. Sterling," the judge's voice echoed through the microphone. "Given the extensive nature of the fabricated financial documents presented to potential investors and the active attempt to flee the scene during your arrest, I deem you a significant flight risk. Bail is denied. You will remain in federal custody pending trial." Trent's knees literally gave out. Two large bailiffs had to catch him by the armpits to keep him from collapsing onto the polished courtroom floor as he sobbed for his parents in Connecticut. Then the judge turned her attention to Vivian. "Mrs. Hayes, the charges of felony identity theft against a family member to secure high-interest loans display a shocking lack of moral character. However, given your lack of prior criminal history, I am setting bail at $250,000. Vivian gasped, looking desperately into the gallery. She made eye contact with her wealthy friends, silently pleading for anyone to post her bond. One by one, the Atlanta elite looked away. They adjusted their coats, checked their phones, and actively pretended they didn't even know her. In the span of a single hour, Vivian realized that the fake, pretentious society she had worshipped her entire life was completely hollow. They didn't love her. They just loved her parties. And now that she was broke and disgraced, she was entirely invisible to them. Unable to post bail, Vivian was marched right back to the holding cells. As she was being led away, her eyes scanned the back of the courtroom and landed on me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply looked back at her with cold, unwavering indifference. I stood up, buttoned my blazer, and walked out of the courthouse, stepping out into the bright, crisp winter sun. While my parents were experiencing the brutal reality of the federal justice system, my sister Jada was experiencing a completely different, yet equally devastating type of downfall. The morning after our explosive Thanksgiving dinner, Jada had desperately tried to pretend nothing had changed. Denial was, after all, her primary survival mechanism. She had driven her heavily financed Range Rover back to her upscale rented townhome, locked the doors, and immediately opened her social media applications. She thought she could simply post a curated picture of a designer coffee cup and ride out the storm. But the internet is remarkably unforgiving, and gossip in Atlanta travels faster than the speed of light. By noon, the local news outlets had published the mugshots of Trent and Vivian. The articles detailed the massive federal wire fraud investigation and explicitly mentioned Trent's luxury lifestyle influencer wife. Within 2 hours, Jada's comment sections were flooded with thousands of angry, mocking messages. Her followers, who had previously praised her aesthetic, were now aggressively tearing her apart, demanding to know how many of her unboxing videos were funded by stolen credit cards. Panicked Jada tried to do what she always did when faced with stress: retail therapy. She drove to the luxury shopping district in Buckhead, marching into a high-end boutique with her chin held high, desperately needing the validation of a sales associate carrying her bags. She brought a $3,000 purse to the register and handed over her platinum credit card. The machine beeped a harsh flat red, declined. Jada scoffed, blaming it on a bank error, and handed over a second card. Declined. A third card. Declined. Because I had immediately filed the identity theft reports, the banks had completely frozen every single joint account credit line and asset attached to Trent and my parents. Jada was entirely cut off. The sales associate looked at her with a mixture of pity and annoyance, quietly asking her to step aside for paying customers. It was the first time in her 31 years of life that Jada Hayes was told she could not have exactly what she wanted. Her total reality check came 3 days later. I received a highly satisfying phone call from my corporate lawyer, Richard Sterling, no relation to Trent, thankfully. He was the independent fiduciary I had appointed to manage the educational trust fund for Jada's children. "Kendra, you were absolutely right about her," Richard said, his voice tinged with professional amusement. "Your sister just stormed into my downtown office demanding a cash advance on the trust. She actually tried to submit an invoice for a wellness retreat in Sedona, claiming it was for her postpartum mental health, which she argued indirectly benefited the children." "And what did you tell her, Richard?" I asked, leaning back in my leather office chair. "I slid a copy of the ironclad trust agreement across the desk." He chuckled. "I informed her that the trust pays the children's private school directly. It pays the pediatrician directly. I told her she doesn't even have the authorization to see the account balance, let alone withdraw a single penny. She threw an absolute tantrum in my lobby. When she realized screaming wouldn't change a legal document, she demanded to know how she was supposed to pay her personal rent or buy groceries." "Let me guess." I smiled. "You gave her the same advice I did." "I printed out a list of local temp agencies and hiring firms," Richard confirmed. "I handed it to her and told her she might want to look into an entry-level administrative position." Within a month, the bank repossessed her Range Rover right out of her driveway. Unable to pay her massive townhome rent, Jada was quietly evicted. With her husband in jail, her parents broke, and her sister acting as an impenetrable financial fortress, the golden child was forced to do the unthinkable. She deleted her social media accounts, packed her remaining clothes into cheap cardboard boxes, and moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a deeply unglamorous part of the city. She eventually got a job working the cosmetics counter at a mid-tier department store. Every single day, she had to stand on her feet for 8 hours, wearing a polyester uniform, forcing a polite smile, while spraying perfume samples for the exact same women she used to look down upon at the country club. The poetic justice of her new reality was absolutely exquisite. But I didn't have time to dwell on Jada's retail career. I was busy taking over an empire. Stepping into Elias Global Logistics as the newly appointed CEO was not a simple, seamless transition. Grandpa Elias had built a multi-million-dollar company, but his executive board was filled with older, stubborn men who had been comfortable in their high-paying positions for far too long. When Elias officially announced his retirement and introduced me as his sole successor, the boardroom tension was thick enough to cut with a machete. They looked at me, a 34-year-old black woman, and saw a nepotism hire. They saw a quiet accountant they thought they could easily manipulate and steamroll. My first board meeting was a deliberate test of my authority. The vice president of operations, a silver-haired man named Gregory, who had a habit of mansplaining basic business concepts, stood up to present the quarterly financial projections. He confidently projected a series of PowerPoint slides filled with bloated budgets and vague, untraceable expense categories. He spoke to me slowly as if I were a child playing dress-up in a corporate office. "So, as you can see, Kendra," Gregory said condescendingly, leaning his heavy hands on the conference table, "the logistics market is highly unpredictable. We need to allocate an additional $2 million to our third-party vendor budget to cover unforeseen operational friction. I know you're just an accountant, but in the real world of supply chains, we have to grease the wheels." I didn't blink. I didn't get angry. I simply opened my leather portfolio and pulled out a stack of heavily highlighted internal audit reports I had compiled the night before. Gregory, I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level, I am not just an accountant. I am a forensic auditor who spent the last decade tracking hidden assets for federal investigations, and frankly, your wheels have been greased a little too well. I slid the documents down the long mahogany table. The other executives leaned in, their confident postures suddenly shifting into nervous apprehension. You are requesting $2 million for third-party vendors. I continued, tapping my pen against the table. Yet according to my deep dive into the ledger last night, 3 of your primary vendors are shell companies registered in Delaware. Curiously, they share the exact same registered agent as a consulting firm owned by your brother-in-law. You haven't been navigating operational friction, Gregory. You have been quietly embezzling company funds through inflated invoices for the past 4 years, completely flying under my grandfather's radar. The blood drained entirely from Gregory's face. He opened his mouth, stammering, trying to form a coherent defense, but the sheer, undeniable weight of the paper trail I had just dropped on the table crushed him instantly. Your employment at Elias Global Logistics is terminated effective immediately, I stated coldly, standing up to my full height. My security team is currently boxing up your office. You have exactly 10 minutes to leave the premises before I forward this entire dossier to the state prosecutor for corporate embezzlement. Consider this your only warning. Gregory didn't say another word. He practically scrambled out of the boardroom, his career completely destroyed in less than 3 minutes. I slowly turned my gaze to the remaining board members. The arrogant smirks were entirely gone. They were staring at me with a profound, newfound mixture of absolute terror and immense respect. They finally realized they weren't dealing with Marcus's discarded daughter. They were dealing with an apex predator. Are there any other questions regarding the quarterly budget? I asked the silent room. Nobody dared to speak. Excellent, I smiled. Let's get to work. The harsh mechanical grinding sound of the heavy-duty paper shredder finally stopped, leaving behind absolute silence in my newly renovated home office. I stared down at the tiny, unrecognizable strips of paper resting quietly in the clear plastic bin. My mother, Vivian, had spent 3 long pages begging for my forgiveness, demanding commissary money, and attempting to manipulate my emotions from her cold, concrete federal holding cell. I did not even read past the first manipulative paragraph before feeding her pathetic lies directly into the sharp steel blades. I turned away from the machine and looked around my beautiful, peaceful home. Over the past 6 months, I had systematically erased every single trace of my parents' pretentious, fake luxury aesthetic from the entire property. The gaudy crystal chandeliers, the ridiculously oversized velvet curtains, and the cheap gold-plated accent pieces were completely gone. In their place, I had installed sleek, modern hardwood floors, warm, minimalist lighting, and authentic, meaningful artwork created by brilliant local Black artists. The house no longer felt like a suffocating staged museum designed exclusively to impress shallow socialites. It finally felt like a real breathable sanctuary of my own making. My personal environment was not the only thing experiencing a massive, highly lucrative transformation this year. Professionally, I was thriving on a level I had never previously imagined possible. I had officially taken the helm of my grandfather's commercial logistics empire, and the resulting synergy was absolutely spectacular. By integrating my elite forensic accounting skills with his massive supply chain network, I had created an unstoppable, completely bulletproof financial fortress. I aggressively audited every single one of his long-term corporate vendors, ruthlessly rooting out hidden inefficiencies and terminating contracts with any suppliers displaying even a hint of financial fraud. The market responded to my aggressive restructuring with overwhelming enthusiasm. Our profit margins skyrocketed by 40% in the very first quarter under my direct leadership. I expanded our corporate operations, acquiring 2 smaller, struggling logistics firms and turning them around with my signature ruthless precision. I was no longer just the quiet daughter crunching numbers in a dark basement. I was the undisputed chief executive officer of a multi-million-dollar enterprise, commanding boardrooms filled with powerful investors who hung on to my every word. I had secured my generational wealth entirely on my own uncompromising terms. To celebrate this magnificent new chapter of my life, I decided to host a grand, elegant dinner party. However, this gathering would be the absolute antithesis of the horrific, toxic nightmare I had endured last November. I did not invite a single member of the pretentious Atlanta elite. I did not invite any gossiping neighbors or status-obsessed social climbers. Instead, I carefully curated a guest list filled exclusively with people who brought genuine value, unadulterated joy, and authentic support into my life. The large mahogany dining table, once the miserable stage for my family's devastating betrayal, was now surrounded by brilliant, loyal friends. My lead legal counsel, who had helped me navigate the complex transition of my grandfather's estate, sat near the center laughing loudly at a joke. My senior forensic accounting partners, the incredibly brilliant women who had stood firmly by my side during the chaotic fallout of Trent's fraudulent scheme, were happily sharing stories about our latest corporate victories. The atmosphere in the elegant dining room was exceptionally warm, vibrating with pure, unfiltered happiness and mutual respect. There was absolutely no posturing, no fake bragging, and no toxic competition anywhere to be found tonight. My private chef served a spectacular multi-course culinary masterpiece that put my mother dry, unseasoned Thanksgiving turkey to absolute shame. We drank expensive, incredibly smooth red wine, celebrating our collective hard work and our shared professional triumphs. Sitting right at the absolute head of the long table, occupying the exact same seat he had claimed 6 months prior, was Grandpa Elias. He looked remarkably different tonight. The heavy, exhausted burden of carrying a deeply ungrateful family had completely vanished from his broad shoulders. He wore a sharp-tailored navy blue suit, his posture incredibly straight and commanding. His dark eyes sparkled with profound, uninhibited joy as he watched me navigate the lively conversation with my trusted colleagues. He was no longer the silent, bitter patriarch watching his legacy be squandered by foolish, greedy scavengers. He was a proud, deeply satisfied mentor witnessing the magnificent rise of his chosen successor. The dark shadows of Marcus, Vivian, Trent, and Jada were entirely banished from this sacred space. I finally had the supportive, loving family I truly deserved. As the wonderful evening progressed and the delicious dessert courses were finally cleared away by the attentive catering staff, a comfortable, deeply satisfying lull settled warmly over the crowded dining table. The soft, elegant jazz music playing gently from the hidden surround sound speakers provided a perfect, relaxing background melody. I leaned back comfortably in my plush chair, taking a slow, appreciative sip of my premium wine, feeling an overwhelming, unbelievably powerful wave of absolute gratitude wash completely over my entire being. I knew deeply I had finally won my total, uncompromising freedom from their endless, suffocating abuse forever. Suddenly, a very familiar, sharp sound cut clearly through the gentle background music and the quiet, friendly chatter. Grandpa Elias slowly reached forward across the table. He picked up his heavy silver fork and tapped the metal edge firmly against his crystal water glass. The sharp, ringing sound echoed loudly across the dining room, instantly drawing the complete attention of every single guest. The lively conversation ceased immediately. Elias placed his fork down gently onto the polished wooden table. He firmly gripped the smooth handle of his sturdy walking cane and slowly pushed himself up to his full, imposing height. He looked directly at me from across the long table, echoing the exact terrifying moment from that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. But this time, the expression on his face carried a completely different, unforgettable, and commanding tone. I have attended countless dinner parties over my 78 long years on this earth. Elias began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the beautiful dining room. I have broken bread with powerful politicians, ruthless corporate executives, and men who claim to own the world. But I have never been more honored to sit at a table than I am tonight. He raised his crystal glass of red wine, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the room completely still. 6 months ago, we sat at a different table. At that table, I watched greedy, extremely foolish people try to tear down the strongest woman I have ever known. I watched them mock her dedication, belittle her accomplishments, and attempt to steal her future simply because they were intimidated by her brilliance. They thought they could break her spirit to fund their pathetic illusions of grandeur. Elias took a slow step forward, resting his free hand gently on the back of his chair. But they forgot one fundamental rule about this family. True legacy is not inherited through bloodlines, and it is certainly not bought with stolen credit cards. True legacy is forged in the fire of adversity. It is built by those who refuse to bow down to manipulation. Kendra, you did not just save my logistics empire from ruin. You saved the soul of what my life work was supposed to represent. You took the reins with absolute integrity, ruthless precision, and a heart that refused to be corrupted by the toxicity surrounding you. He turned slightly, looking at the diverse, joyful faces of the friends and colleagues gathered around my table. Look at the room you have built, Kendra. You cleared out the scavengers and filled your life with people who genuinely value your mind and respect your boundaries. You are not just the chief executive officer of our company. You are the architect of your own truly magnificent destiny. Elias raised his glass higher, his proud smile radiating pure warmth. To Kendra, the absolute best of us all, the true unbreakable legacy of this family. May your empire continue to grow, and may your peace remain forever undisturbed. To Kendra, the entire table echoed in perfect unison. I raised my own glass, my vision blurring slightly with happy unshed tears as the crystal chimed harmoniously around the room. I took a slow sip of the rich wine, letting the profound meaning of my grandfather's words settle deep into my chest. As I looked around the brilliantly lit room, a monumental wave of realization washed over me. This was what real love looked like. It was not transactional. It did not require me to shrink myself to make others feel incredibly important. It did not demand my financial ruin as proof of familial loyalty. My chosen family sat before me, laughing, sharing stories, and lifting each other up. My brilliant legal team, my dedicated forensic accountants, and my fiercely loyal friends had completely replaced the empty superficial void left behind by Marcus, Vivian, Jada, and Trent forever. I had surgically removed the cancerous tumor of my biological family, and the resulting healing process had been nothing short of truly miraculous. I thought about the dark, miserable path I had narrowly escaped. If I had stayed in that basement silently paying that mortgage while absorbing their daily emotional abuse, I would have been entirely destroyed by their massive financial fraud. Trent would have drained my credit score to absolute zero before heading off to federal prison. Jada would have blamed me for her ruined influencer aesthetic. Marcus and Vivian would have demanded I sacrifice my entire career to pay their legal fees and maintain their fake, pathetic socialite status. Instead, Trent was sitting in a federal penitentiary cell, learning exactly how useless his white corporate privilege was behind thick iron bars. Jada was folding cheap clothes in a tiny retail store, her fake digital kingdom completely erased from the internet. Marcus and Vivian were living in a cramped, miserable apartment, thoroughly ostracized by the very same elite society they had destroyed their own daughter to impress. They had chased an absolute illusion and ended up with absolutely nothing. I, on the other hand, had absolutely everything. I possessed total financial supremacy, commanding a multi-million-dollar logistics and accounting empire that was growing exponentially every single day. I lived in a breathtaking debt-free sanctuary, tailored exactly to my own exquisite taste. But the greatest victory of all was not the money, the prestigious titles, or the beautiful real estate. The greatest victory was the absolute, unshakable emotional freedom that I felt. I no longer woke up with a tight, heavy knot of anxiety in my stomach, anticipating the next cruel insult from my mother or the next condescending lecture from my brother-in-law. I no longer had to constantly justify my mere existence to people who were fundamentally incapable of recognizing my immense worth. I had reclaimed my stolen identity, shattered their fragile glass house, and emerged from the wreckage as an untouchable titan. But biology is never a valid excuse for abuse. Loyalty should never be a one-way street leading directly to your own destruction. I chose myself, and in doing so, I unlocked a beautiful, limitless future. I placed my wine glass back onto the polished table, leaning back in my comfortable chair, as the joyful conversation resumed around me. The nightmare was officially over, and the dawn of my new empire was glorious. If my journey resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and reclaiming your power. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that their potential is limitless once they stop carrying the dead weight of ungrateful people. Thank you for joining me on this amazing journey. Always remember that your peace is your greatest asset, and you should never let anyone bankrupt your soul.